Audie Leon Murphy, a young man from a poverty-stricken rural town in Texas, would go on to be a war hero, a poet, an author, an actor, and a songwriter. The man had served on almost every front of the European campaign in World War II, and not only did he earn every combat award the U.S. Army had to offer at the time, he also received numerous awards from France and Belgium for valor on numerous occasions. In today's video, we will go over not only his early life and heroic actions in combat, but also his time in Hollywood, his constant dedication and years of selfless service for his brothers in arms after the war, and ultimately his death as one of the most beloved men in history. Murphy was born in 1925 and raised in a small town called Kingston, Texas, with a population of less than 300 people. His father, Emmett Murphy, was an alcoholic sharecropper who often beat his 12 children, while also failing to provide for his family. Due to Audie's father failing to make ends meet, at an extremely young age, Murphy stepped up to provide food for his family by hunting squirrels and rabbits. In a personal statement by his sister Nadine,
he got a little old 22, I don't know where, but he was really good at it. He could kill a rabbit on the run. Well, that's how we lived, Dad. That's how we ate. He would go out and kill squirrels and rabbits. And I guess we could say we're alive today because of him. He was my hero even then, before he ever did anything great. He was great to me then.
Not only did Audie hunt to feed his family, after dropping out of the 5th grade at age 12, he would go on to pick cotton, pull corn, or find any other paying job that he could provide. As recalled by one of his childhood friends, he was very energetic and very hardworking. When Audie was just 15 years old, his father in 1940 would walk out of his family to never be seen again. So later in the year, Audie and his brothers and sisters would move in with their elder sister, Corrine. In the following year, a month before his 16th birthday, he would lose his mother to pneumonia. This had sent him into a fit of rage, and it motivated him to join the military. Being that Audie was too young, his eldest sister Corrine was able to falsify documents claiming that the young 16-year-old Audie was actually a year older. At first, Murphy tried to enlist in the Marines, but at just 5'5", 112 pounds, they laughed him out of the office for being too short and scrawny. So the young man, determined to enlist, went to the Army recruiter. And after initially being denied for a job as a paratrooper, Murphy was accepted in the infantry as a rifleman. On June 30th, 1942, 10 days after his actual 17th birthday, he went off to basic training. Once Murphy had completed basic training in infantry school, he was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. He would arrive to his unit as a replacement after they had already been deployed to Morocco and had been fighting all throughout North Africa. Murphy didn't see any combat upon arriving to his unit, but the 15th Regiment would continue to train in preparation for their Allied amphibious assault on Litka. Here, Murphy would experience his first taste of combat on July 10, 1943 as a division runner. Moments after hitting the beach while under an intense artillery bombardment, Murphy would see a fellow man from his company vaporized right before his eyes by an artillery shell. The loss of this man and many more on the beaches of Sicily would personally affect Murphy and his comrades later in life, but for the time being, they put their emotions aside to complete the mission. While Bravo Company continued to move up the beach, they encountered comparatively light resistance and proceeded to move further inland. While on a reconnaissance patrol in Connecticut, Murphy would encounter 2 Italian officers attempting to flee on horseback. Murphy, being the expert rifleman he was, dropped to a knee and shot the fleeing officers. Due to these being the first lives Murphy had personally taken, he would later write about this experience saying, "Now I have shed my first blood. I feel no qualms, no pride, no remorse. There is only a weary indifference that will follow me throughout the war." As fighting continued in Sicily, Murphy would continue to show outstanding commitment to duty, and after only 5 days in combat, he would be promoted to the rank of corporal. After the completion of the 15th Regiment's operation in Sicily, they would move on to mainland Italy. Landing on the beaches of Salerno on September 9, 1943, they would encounter fierce resistance but still managed to slowly advance. While scouting along the Volturno River, Murphy, his best friend Laddie Tipton, and one other soldier were ambushed by a German machine gun position. After coming under fire and losing the 3rd man, Tipton began suppressing the Germans with grenades while Murphy maneuvered onto the machine gun position and killed 5 Germans with his Thompson. In the following month of October, while in a defensive position of the Volturno line, Murphy and his squad would go on to ambush a 7-man German recon team, killing 3 and capturing the other 4. Due to this and other similar actions, Murphy would be promoted to sergeant on December 13, 1943. And in practically no time at all, exactly 1 month later, Murphy would be promoted to staff sergeant on January 13, 1944. In less than 2 weeks, Murphy had become sick with a 105-degree fever, and after initially refusing to go to sickbay, he was practically dragged down there by his command. This caused him to be stuck in a naval hospital while the rest of his unit would make the amphibious assault on Anzio on January 22nd. After the initial battle on the beachhead, Murphy would rejoin his unit, and to his surprise, he learned that his very close friend Joe Saja had been killed by an artillery shell. Regardless, Murphy would continue to fight alongside his men on the beaches of Anzio in the First Battle of Cisterna, which came to be some of the most intense fighting Murphy and his men had ever encountered. The ensuing 3-day battle had left Bravo Company with just 30 men. Later, after the war, Murphy would write a poem in commemoration to his fallen brothers. That death awaits, there's no debate, no triumph will we reap. The crosses grow on Anzio, where hell is 6 feet deep. As fighting continued on the Anzio beachhead on March 2nd, 1944, Murphy and his men were held up in a farmhouse as they encountered 20 German tanks probing the American line. Murphy quickly got on the radio and called for an artillery strike that knocked out the lead tank and effectively blocked the road, causing the remaining tanks to retreat. Since Murphy realized that the lead tank had only been partially disabled, he waited till the cover of dark before pushing out with a fire team. He crawled in a ditch 300 meters ahead of friendly lines on his stomach and fully destroyed the tank utilizing 6 rifle-fired grenades. Due to the sound of the multiple explosions, the Germans opened fire on Murphy's position, and Murphy, seeing the machine gun tracers skip around him, rapidly proceeded to sprint down the 300-meter ditch and back into the farmhouse. For this action, he would be awarded the Bronze Star with a V for Valor. He would also be awarded a second Bronze Star on May 8th for not only one particular action, but to recognize the many patrols and missions Murphy had organized, led, and participated in while engaged in combat at Anzio and Salerno. After months of heavy but inconclusive fighting, by June 4th, 1944, Allied troops had fought their way inland all the way to Rome, which actually had no strategical value and made Murphy and his men very upset, because it allowed the German 10th Army to retreat and regroup with the rest of the main German force. In a letter Murphy wrote back home to his friend, he said, "It isn't so bad here now. I've had 2 passes to Rome, but was disgusted with the place. It's nothing like I expected. I wonder if Paris will be a disappointment too. Hope I get to go to France. Since I came this far, I may as well see them all." Murphy would get his wish. On August 15, 1944, his unit would conduct an amphibious landing at Yellow Beach near Remetuel. After practically waltzing up onto the beach, Murphy's platoon quickly advanced inland through a vineyard. As the platoon approached the hill in front of them, they came under fire from on top of an adjacent hill to their front right flank by small arms and machine gun fire. During the confusion of trying to find cover, the platoon's machine gun team got separated, and after being pinned down for almost 20 minutes, Murphy had had enough. While under fire, he dashed into the draw on their right flank to hopefully maneuver onto the Germans' position. During this time, Murphy had located their machine gun team near the draw, and he soon ordered the machine gun team to push forward up the hill to knock out the German position, but they refused. After refusing to push up, Murphy grabbed the gun and moved it forward himself, effectively decimating the German machine gun crew. Murphy then abandoned the machine gun and advanced alone up the draw on the side of the hill that paralleled the enemy position. While charging up the draw, he came under fire from 2 Germans coming out of the farmhouse on top of the hill. Murphy quickly shot and killed these 2 men, and at some point traveling up the draw, Murphy's best friend Tipton met up with him and convinced Murphy to allow him to help. Murphy reluctantly agreed, and the 2 made their way up the draw. While working their way up, Murphy and Tipton killed and captured multiple Germans in foxholes, and after nearing the top, the 2 came under fire from another German machine gun position near the farmhouse. In an exchange of fire with the Germans, they managed to get the crew to surrender, and Tipton, believing that the action was over, sprang to his feet, but before he knew it, the Germans had zipped him with small arms fire from the farmhouse and killed him. This threw Murphy into a fit of rage. He proceeded to kill the surrendering crew and steal their machine gun. And while utilizing the stolen machine gun, he managed to get the remaining 6 Germans to surrender. Murphy would later be credited with the annihilation and capture of an entire enemy garrison and would receive the Distinguished Service Cross. As Murphy returned back to the body of his friend, he was overwhelmed with grief. Undoubtedly, this event would take a serious toll on him the rest of his life, but regardless of how he felt, the war continued, and so did Murphy. Exactly 1 month later, on September 15th, Murphy would receive his first Purple Heart. While standing in a small group, Murphy and his men were hit by a mortar that landed practically on top of them. It managed to kill 2 men and wound 3 others. Fortunately for Murphy, he only took shrapnel in his foot, and the injury was minor, so he was able to stay in the fight. As fighting progressed, the 15th Regiment continued north, eventually reaching a stalemate with the Germans at the Clary Quarry, due to the extensive fortifications and tunnels dug into the rock. From this position, German snipers and hidden machine gun nests were stubbornly harassing friendly forces with devastating results. In the early morning of October 2nd, 1944, Murphy, trying to get a leg up on the Germans, low-crawled his way up the rocky hillside. And as he did, the German machine gun crew spotted him from a distance of about 15 yards. They attempted to pivot their gun and fire, but the barrel became snagged on a tree limb. The machine gun sprayed rounds that barely missed Murphy. After nearly being killed, Murphy took the advantage of the situation by tossing 2 grenades and firing his weapon. He shot and killed 2 Germans before the grenades went off, then proceeded to throw 2 more grenades that effectively killed another 2 men and injured 3 more. As the final German soldier attempted to flee the position while armed, Murphy shot and killed him. For this action, he would be awarded his first Silver Star. And just 3 days later, Murphy would earn his second Silver Star. On October 5th, Murphy led his understrength platoon several miles north of Clairette. Utilizing a creek bed tapering the hillside for concealment, he hoped to sneak past the German defenses. But unfortunately for Murphy's platoon, the Germans had changed locations and were in a well-concealed position to enfilade the creek bed. As the Germans opened up with accurate small arms and machine gun fire on Murphy's platoon, 6 soldiers were instantly killed before the platoon could find any cover. And Murphy, not wanting to just sit there, moved forward down the hill with 6 men and a radio. They did their best to use what sparse cover was available, but unfortunately, a machine gun opened up and killed 4 more. While under heavy fire, Murphy ordered his other 2 remaining men to dig in. As they raked shallow depressions out of the rocky soil with their entrenching tools, rounds continued to snap just above their heads. Cold, wet, and scared, Murphy inched his way forward to try and pinpoint the enemy position. Murphy's luck held out as he moved down 50 yards into a safe depression. He then noticed 2 German riflemen in foxholes which were dug in forward of the main enemy location. Murphy shot and killed them both, and using his radio, he called for fire onto the main enemy position. Germans who decided to take cover from the mortars quickly became casualties, and those that attempted to flee were soon picked off by Bravo Company's adjacent platoons. For nearly an hour, Murphy directed mortar fire, and when the battle was over, 15 Germans were dead with another 35 wounded. Most likely for the fact that Murphy had gained 2 Silver Stars in less than 4 days, and he continued to show outstanding leadership in some of the most intense situations a man could be in, he would receive his battlefield commission to second lieutenant on October 4th, 1944. As the Allies continued through France, the 15th Regiment, along with the rest of the 6th Army Group, attempted to break through the Belfort Gap and into Germany. Lieutenant Murphy and his platoon moved out at daybreak through the forest on October 2nd, 1944. Shortly after Murphy and his men moved out, they came under fire by a German sniper. In an attempt to locate the sniper's position, Murphy pushed forward ahead of his platoon. As he trudged forward, a sniper round ricocheted off a tree and clean through his right hip. Then when Murphy collapsed to the ground, his helmet fell off and rolled a short distance into a bush. The sniper, however, made a fatal error as he pushed the camouflage to the side to get a better look at Murphy's helmet, which he thought was another American. When the sniper fired around the helmet, Murphy spotted him. And in some of the most cowboy movie heroics ever, Murphy managed to one-hand his carbine and shoot the sniper right between the eyes. Murphy then made his way back to the platoon, and in the process captured 2 German FOs in the area. Upon returning to his platoon, Murphy was then medevaced to a nearby aid station, but was forced to wait several days before he could be transported to the Army hospital. Due to the delay, Murphy developed gangrene and was forced to a debridement of several pounds of dead flesh from his hip. Despite now missing a large chunk of his hip, he rejoined his unit on January 14, 1945 in the Colmar pocket of France, where after a week and a half stalemate and awaiting for desperately needed reinforcements, on January 25, 1945, the woods erupted with small arms, machine gun, mortar, and tank fire, and a large-scale German counterattack. Amidst the attack, Murphy witnessed 2 lieutenants get killed by a mortar round. Seconds later, a mortar blew up near Murphy, throwing him to the ground and peppering his leg with shrapnel. Immediately, he applied first aid to a bleeding leg and extracted as much shrapnel as possible, before continuing to fight on with his platoon to help hold off the Germans from breaking through the Allied lines. This would earn Murphy his 3rd Purple Heart. After the battle, Murphy refused to get medevaced and stayed with the other 18 survivors of Bravo Company. Due to Murphy being the only officer left, he took charge of the extremely understrength company. The following day, after pushing south to Holtzfear, the company was now supported by 2 tank destroyers and minimal reinforcements. At around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Murphy and his men endured an artillery bombardment that knocked out 1 tank destroyer. After the barrage, Murphy looked across the field in anticipation of an attack. He then saw 250 Germans and 6 tanks approaching their lines. Murphy quickly told his men to move into their dug-in positions 100 yards deep into the tree line. While receiving fire support from the lone tank destroyer 10 yards off to Murphy's right flank, he would remain at his command post in the open underneath a tree to call in for artillery fire. As the Germans began getting closer, they were delivering heavy and somewhat accurate machine gun and tank fire. Moments later, a German tank would deliver a single direct hit on the tank destroyer, causing it to slowly burn and the crew to evacuate. Amidst the U.S. artillery bombardment, the tanks began to sweep past Murphy's position to get out of the kill zone. And while Murphy's men in the tree line were now engaging with the German armor with bazookas and separate artillery fire, Murphy continued to call for artillery on the rapidly advancing German infantry, but nothing would stop them. To avoid becoming enveloped by the enemy assault, Murphy dashed over the tank destroyer while under accurate small arms and machine gun fire to climb and reach the 50 cal on top. Without hesitation, he laid down burst after burst of machine gun fire onto the Germans. Eventually, a squad of Germans broke off and utilized a ditch on Murphy's right flank. They managed to get 50 yards away from Murphy before he spotted the squad and eliminated them all, while he was still under accurate fire from the infantry and now German artillery. Due to the tanks getting pretty beaten up by the entrenched Allies, they turned onto Murphy's position in an attempt to free up their own infantry to push through the woods and snuff out Murphy's men. Luckily for Murphy, the artillery knocked out a few tanks and stopped them from overrunning his position before the remainder turned and ran. However, the tanks did manage to score 2 more accurate hits onto the mangled tank destroyer and in the process re-injured Murphy's already wounded leg. In the Germans' relentless pursuit, they managed to get within 10 yards of Murphy's position several times to throw grenades, but each time they were cut down by his 50 cal, no matter how much incoming fire he received. With his trousers soaked in blood and his face blackened with smoke, Murphy held off the German advance for an hour, killing over 50 Germans. Finally, after spending his last round, he dismounted the tank and just walked over to the position of his men amidst the still active battle going on around him. Later in his book, he would write, "As if under the influence of some drug, I slid off the tank destroyer and without looking back, walked down the road through the forest. If the Germans wanted to shoot me, let them. I am too weak from fear and exhaustion to care." Refusing medical treatment, Murphy rallied his men for a counterattack to sweep the remainder of the German forces back into the woods across the field. After sending the Germans into a full retreat, Murphy immediately stopped in the middle of the field for medical treatment, but still refused to get evacuated. For this incredibly heroic action, and against all odds, at just 19 years old, Lieutenant Murphy would be awarded with the Medal of Honor. Despite receiving such an incredible award, all Murphy wanted to do was stay in the fight with his men. And by February 8th, the city of Colmar surrendered to combined Allied forces, ending the battle. Murphy was then later promoted to first lieutenant on February 16, 1945. Shortly after, on March 11th, he was reassigned to the 15th Infantry Regiment liaison officer. In light of the German surrender on May 8, 1945, Allied forces remained in Germany to ensue a peaceful transition to a post-Nazi state. Murphy would eventually be sent home on June 8, 1945. Upon coming home, the nation celebrated his name and couldn't get enough of him. Murphy participated in parades, concerts, and anywhere else that the crowd could gather to hear him speak. The U.S. Army in particular loved Murphy and offered him a full ride to West Point so he could make the Army a full career. Except, he turned them down. Murphy was afraid that he wouldn't pass the physical requirements due to his previous combat injuries. Murphy would still remain in the Army, but as a reservist, eventually reaching the rank of major in 1966 and retiring in 1969. Immediately after the war, Audie would continue to fight in an seemingly winnable war in his dreams night after night, now understood as PTSD. Like many others who leave military service, Murphy struggled to find purpose in his new civilian life. Lucky enough for Audie, since his name was so popular, he received a letter from James Cagney that invited him to Hollywood. Murphy then accepted this offer and lived in Cagney's guest house. This allowed Audie to get his strength back up since he looked very sickly and hadn't been eating properly due to his PTSD. By the end of 1945, Cagney offered Murphy a job to work at his independent film company for $150 a week, providing that he also learned how to act. During this time, Murphy would begin to date a rising actress named Wanda Hendricks in 1964. All Murphy's time on set would pay off when he accepted his first role as a West Point cadet in the 1948 production of Beyond Glory. Unfortunately for Audie, Cagney's company took a downturn and could no longer employ him. And while still living on government disability for his combat injuries, he moved into a boxing gym run by Terry Hunt, who was a big supporter of Murphy. To keep his mind and body occupied, Audie would box with some of the members of the gym.
He came in the steam bath with me the first time I'd ever seen him with Audie's boxing trunks on. I didn't know who the hell it was. And I looked and he didn't have any hip. So we finished our steam bath and I went outside and I said to Terry Hunt, the boss, I said, who the hell is the kid I box with every day? He said, I thought you knew it's Audie Murphy. So that's how we met. And he had been in the war and I fell in love with him. He was just a great guy.
Audie remained determined to make it. And with the help of David McClure, Audie would start in his first leading role in Bad Boy. Audie would go on to sign large contracts with Universal Studios, and at the highlight of Murphy's life, he would marry Wanda in 1949. But life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Murphy was still dealing with his PTSD on a daily basis. It caused him to have nightmares, insomnia, vomiting, depression, and anxiety. Due to his numbness, Audie was abusing sleeping pills, which he later overcame after locking himself in a hotel room to sober up. But the pain remained in Audie's mind. His wife Wanda remarked once that Audie would begin to tear up and have terrible grief over seeing German war orphans on the news. Regardless of all that, Murphy felt personal responsibility to speak out for veterans everywhere about the importance of understanding PTSD. Murphy would also begin to write poetry to deal with his symptoms, which eventually led him to write a book called To Hell and Back, which were the first-hand experiences of Murphy in combat. When he released the book, Audie commemorated his two best friends, Lottie and Joe, by saying, "If there be any glory in war, let it rest on men like these." Unable to fully cope with his emotions, Murphy began a self-destructive lifestyle that led to gambling and infidelity. With Murphy's life on a slow downward trajectory, he began a love affair with a stewardess named Pamela Archer. Eventually, Wanda and Audie would divorce in 1950, and 4 days later, he married Pamela. As Murphy's personal life began to take unforeseen turns, his book took off in 1955 and was developed into a movie, where he played himself and relived his days on the battlefield with somewhat mixed personal feelings. This movie gave Murphy a payout of $400,000, and in an effort to possibly correct previous bad habits, Audie decided to start investing his money into real estate, the oil market, and breeding horses. Unfortunately for Murphy, it wouldn't last long before this led him down another path to gambling. At this time in his life, Audie found almost no excitement anymore, and his depression was getting the best of him. In an interview, Audie said, "I didn't care if I won or lost. It was if I wanted to destroy everything I had built up." Despite the internal battle Audie was fighting, he avoided to show it to anyone. On the outside, his life looked perfect. He had a successful career, a wife, 2 sons, and he even began writing country songs in 1962. By 1967, after finishing his last big-budget role in 40 Guns to Apache Pass, and most likely seeing his pool of opportunities dry up, Audie sold both of his ranches and moved into a very nice house in North Hollywood. Murphy would eventually convert his garage into a makeshift bedroom where he most likely slept due to his still persistent nightmares and not wanting to disturb his family. In a week-long interview later that year, he spoke with journalist Thomas Morgan and told him that to become an executioner, somebody cold and analytical, to be trained to kill, and then come back to civilian life and be alone in the crowd, it takes an awful long time to get over it. Fear and depression come over you. Unfortunately, until the end of his life, he would be burdened with these feelings. And regardless of all Murphy's previous success in film, eventually he ended up doing low-budget westerns, and Audie's life really took a downward trajectory. In the last movie he ever made, A Time for Dying was a financial flop and wasn't even released in the US. It was a hard time for Murphy, and in an attempt to recoup losses, on May 28, 1971, he took a business flight on a private plane with a couple other investors to go look at housing developments in Virginia. Due to sudden bad weather, zero visibility, and faulty flight instruments, the plane crashed into the side of Brushy Mountain. And just like that, one of the most beloved and highly decorated men in history was dead. Even though Murphy's life was short-lived, because of him there are millions of people around the world who can benefit not only from his heroic actions in combat, but also his steadfast commitment to his fellow veterans, and finally, he brought joy to people who loved his movies, even when he himself was going through hard times. I think that we can all learn from Audie Murphy, that no matter what challenges await in the future, whether they be self-inflicted or not, you can still get up every day and give it everything you got to improve the lives of others. With that being said, that's all I have. If you stuck around this long, I just want to say thank you for watching.